Hi, welcome to this video. It's going to show you how to find the sine, cosine, and tangent ratios if you're given a right triangle with the side measures there. The ratios that we are talking about today is, I'll actually write them out here just to give you kind of the formal definitions of what they are. Well, it's maybe not a super formal definition. So the sine of an angle, to find that, you're going back a slide, opposite divided by the hypotenuse. If you're asked to find the cosine of an angle, that ratio would be the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And then the third trig ratio that we're dealing with today is the tangent, and that is the opposite over the adjacent. The way that we remember this is usually SOHCAHTOA. This is a mnemonic device. If you write that down at the top of your paper, it kind of gives you a hint or a reminder for which is which. And I'll kind of show you how that works as we go through a few problems. I do have a couple other videos on trig that kind of just talk about how to label a triangle, also how to find just the sine itself. If you want to kind of take it a little bit slower, just go find the one that's just on sine. Then there's another video that's just on sine and cosine, so it kind of works up a little bit slower. The 3 steps that I encourage my students to use are listed there. You might want to pause the video and write them down if you feel like it. The first thing, so let's just work through this problem. The first step that we're going to do, it says identify the reference angle. The reference angle, when we look at the picture, we can't tell. There is a mark here that tells us that's a 90-degree angle. In right triangle trig, the 90-degree angle will not be the reference angle, so we just kind of ignore that one. So how do we find the reference angle? Well, they're giving it to us actually in the problem itself. They're asking us to find the cosine of A. So A is going to be our reference angle. All right, so step 2, we want to label the hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent sides. We can't do this until we know what the reference angle is. The hypotenuse of any right triangle is always opposite the right angle, so I'm going to label that side H. The opposite side is the side that's opposite the reference angle. That's why we need to know it first. So if A is our reference, we go straight across. The opposite side is 40, so I'm going to label that with an O. I only have one side left in this triangle, so that's our adjacent. And that makes sense because adjacent means next to, and that is one of the sides that is next to angle A. So the problem says to find cosine. So this is the trig function that we are going to be looking at, and the cosine of angle A is A over H. Everything's labeled. All we have to do really is look at the triangle. So we need to find A, which is 30, put our fraction bar over, and H, which we have labeled, and that is our 50. And we need to reduce or simplify. If needed, I know that 10 goes into both of those numbers, so our final answer for this is 3/5. So again, if you can kind of follow these 3 steps, it kind of get in the mode for doing that. By marking up your picture, you're going to process the facts a little bit easier, and you don't have to think a whole lot when you actually get down to the writing the ratio out, because your triangle's labeled so well. So again, if you follow those 3 steps, it should be pretty concrete, I hope. Let's look at it. Do opposite. Whoops, one more problems. So the top one here, they're asking us to find the tangent of Z. So that tells me that Z is my reference angle, and again, I'm going to circle it because it just helps it pop out on the picture. Now I need to label my triangle. Opposite the 90-degree, that's my hypotenuse. Opposite the reference angle is my opposite. The remaining side is my adjacent. So they want us to do tangent. So if I look at our SOHCAHTOA mnemonic, tangent is the last 3 letters, and so that I know that the tangent of an angle is equal to opposite over adjacent. So to find the ratio in this particular triangle, I'm going to look back at my picture. I have my opposite already labeled, and it is 40, so that's going to be on the top of my fraction. And on the bottom, I need the adjacent. Again, I go back, it's already labeled, so my adjacent is 30. Also in this example, 10 goes into both of these numbers, so 40 divided by 10 is 4, and 30 divided by 10 is 3. All right, let's look at the bottom problem here, and I think there's 2 more on the next slide, so if at any point you're feeling confident, you can just look at the problems, hit pause, figure out the answers, and then hit play and see if you get the right answers. So in the bottom problem here, we have Z as our reference angle. It's a little tiny picture, isn't it? And then, so I've circled that. I'm going to label. So opposite the 90 degrees is my hypotenuse. Opposite the reference is my opposite, and that means that the side left over is my adjacent. For sine, that's the so part of my SOHCAHTOA. So I know that the sine of an angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So I just look at my triangle. My opposite I can see really quick. There's a 40 there. My hypotenuse is 41. Those cannot reduce, so that is my final answer for that. Just as an aside, if you took a calculator and divided 40 by 41, you'd get a really long decimal. And so sometimes if you've done some work with trig prior to this, you might have seen that trig ratios can sometimes be really long decimals. And that's where they come from. It's just, in this case, we're leaving them as fractions, that's all. Okay, last two problems. And let's see, the top one, we are asked to find the tangent of C. So C is my reference angle. When I go to label the triangles, the hypotenuse is 37, the opposite is 35, and the 12 is the adjacent. Tangent is the TOA part. So I know that the tangent of an angle is O over A. And again, I can just look over at the triangle, have it labeled really clearly. So the O I have labeled as 35. My adjacent, I can see I have labeled as 12. And those two cannot be reduced. So that would be the final answer for that problem. Last problem, cosine of A. We're going to circle the reference angle. And then we label the triangle up. There is the hypotenuse, which is 13. Our reference angle, we follow that across. 5 is going to be our opposite. And that means 12 is our adjacent. Going back to what they want the cosine. So cosine deals with those three letters. So again, that tells me that the cosine of an angle is A over H. And then if I just look at the picture that I've labeled really well, the adjacent is 12 and the hypotenuse is 13. These cannot be reduced, so that would be your final answer. Again, this is just a quick snapshot of one part of learning trig. It's kind of in the introductory portions of it. So hopefully this has helped a little bit with your understanding.